lynching is color line murder. Second, crimes against women is the excuse, not the cause.
Strong, strong, strong. Go back to where you're from. Get it together. Strong, strong, strong.
Meet Ida B. Wells, the black woman who stood as a formidable force against the terrorizing grip of the Ku Klux Klan in the late 19th century. In a courageous one-woman battle, Wells not only exposed the dark underbelly of racism, but also single-handedly challenged the white establishment, becoming a target of their fear and hatred. Her relentless fight led to attempts on her life, including the burning down of her printing company by those threatened by her unyielding pursuit of justice. Wells, a trailblazing journalist and anti-lynching crusader, fearlessly wielded her pen as a weapon against racial injustice. The Klan, recognizing the potency of her words, sought to silence her through violence and intimidation. Yet, in the face of danger, Wells emerged as an indomitable force, a black woman unyielding in her commitment to dismantle systemic oppression. Join us on a journey through the life of Ida B. Wells, a fearless activist whose resilience and bravery struck fear into the hearts of those who sought to uphold the oppressive status quo. Ida B. Wells' early life and activism were profoundly shaped by the racial injustices and violence she witnessed growing up in the post-Civil War South. Born into slavery on July 16, 1862, in Holly Springs, Mississippi, Wells was the daughter of James and Elizabeth Wells, who prioritized education and instilled a strong sense of justice in their children. Wells's parents were active in the Reconstruction-era efforts to improve education for newly emancipated African Americans. Tragically, both of her parents succumbed to yellow fever when she was just 16 years old, leaving her responsible for caring for her 5 younger siblings. Despite the challenges, Wells managed to keep her family together and continued her education. She attended Rust College, a historically black college in Holly Springs, where she excelled academically. However, her education was cut short when she had to leave school to support her siblings. This early experience with adversity and responsibility laid the groundwork for her later resilience and determination in the face of racial injustice. Wells' early encounters with racism were not confined to the pages of textbooks. They were vivid and personal. She experienced firsthand the degradation and humiliation faced by African Americans in the South. The horrors of slavery were replaced by the harsh realities of segregation, discrimination, and violence. The murder of her dear friends, Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Henry Stewart in 1892, proved to be a turning point in Wells' life. The 3 men, successful business owners in Memphis, were lynched by a white mob, purportedly in response to economic competition. This brutal event ignited a fire within Wells and fueled her commitment to exposing and combating the pervasive issue of lynching. Devastated by the loss of her friends, Wells channeled her grief into activism. She began writing articles for black newspapers and using her platform to condemn the injustice of lynching. Her first editorial, titled Free Speech and Headlight, criticized the lynch mob and urged African Americans to leave Memphis, advocating for economic boycotts as a form of protest. The response to her writings was swift and harsh. Wells was terminated from her teaching position, and her printing press was destroyed. Undeterred, she continued her anti-lynching campaign, moving to New York and then to Chicago, where she found greater support within the African American community. In 1889, Wells became a co-owner and editor of the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight newspaper. This platform became instrumental in her crusade against lynching. Wells used the paper to expose the true motivations behind lynching incidents, challenging the prevailing narrative that justified these acts as a response to alleged crimes. The newspaper provided a powerful voice for Wells and other African American journalists to confront racial injustice directly. Wells' uncompromising stance and fearless reporting garnered attention and support, but it also invited the ire of white supremacists, including the Ku Klux Klan. The early experiences of Ida B. Wells, from her upbringing in the aftermath of slavery to the personal tragedy of losing close friends to lynching, laid the foundation for her lifelong commitment to activism. Her early work in journalism and advocacy set the stage for her confrontations with the Ku Klux Klan, as she fearlessly exposed the systemic racism and violence plaguing African Americans in the late 19th century. Ida B. Wells's early life and activism were marked by personal hardships and a profound sense of justice. Her response to the lynching of her friends ignited a passion for activism and a commitment to exposing and combating racial injustice. The foundation she laid during this period became the bedrock of her later confrontations with the Ku Klux Klan, as she fearlessly used her pen to challenge the prevailing racist narratives of the time. Wells's journey into journalism began with her appointment as a teacher in Memphis. Her involvement in the press was sparked by a personal tragedy, the lynching of 3 of her friends. Seeking to shed light on the epidemic of lynching and racial violence, Wells started writing for Black-owned newspapers in Memphis. Her early articles demonstrated her eloquence and a deep sense of justice, foreshadowing her future as a formidable investigative journalist. She found a prominent platform for her investigative journalism when she became co-owner and editor of the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight newspaper in the early 1890s. This newspaper provided her with the autonomy to pursue stories that mainstream media often ignored or downplayed. The publication became a powerful tool in her crusade against racial violence and lynching. Wells' investigative reporting focused primarily on the pervasive issue of lynching in the American South. At the time, lynching was not only a heinous act of violence, but also a tool of intimidation and control wielded by white supremacists to maintain racial hierarchy. Wells recognized that unveiling the truth behind these brutal acts was crucial in challenging the prevailing narrative that often justified or dismissed them. One of the hallmarks of Wells's investigative journalism was her meticulous approach to gathering evidence. She conducted on-the-ground investigations, collecting testimonies from witnesses and survivors of lynching incidents. Wells often risked her own safety to visit lynching sites and document the details of these atrocities. Her commitment to first-hand accounts and hard evidence set her work apart and gave it undeniable credibility. Wells' exposés went beyond just recounting the events. She delved into the motivations and systemic issues that fueled lynching. Through her writing, she debunked the prevalent myth that lynching was a response to alleged crimes committed by African Americans. Instead, she exposed lynching as a tool used by white supremacists to maintain control, suppress Black economic progress, and instill fear in the African American community. Wells's fearless reporting drew the ire of white supremacists, especially the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan saw her work as a direct challenge to their agenda of racial superiority and sought to silence her through intimidation and violence. As her articles gained wider circulation, the Klan intensified its efforts to suppress her message, viewing Wells as a threat to their deeply rooted racist ideology. The Ku Klux Klan's opposition to Wells reached a sinister climax when they targeted her printing company. In an attempt to silence her, they burned down the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight newspaper offices. This act of terror was a clear message to Wells and other advocates for racial equality, a warning that challenging the established racial hierarchy would not be tolerated. As Wells continued her investigative journalism and activism, the threats against her escalated. The Klan, along with other white supremacist groups, attempted to intimidate her into silence. Wells faced numerous personal risks, including threats of violence and assassination attempts. Despite the dangers, she remained resolute in her commitment to exposing the truth and seeking justice for the victims of racial violence. Wells' powerful exposés had a profound impact on the public consciousness. Her work brought international attention to the horrors of lynching and sparked outrage among activists and sympathizers. The exposure of the true motivations behind lynching challenged societal perceptions and fueled the nascent civil rights movement. Ida B. Wells's investigative journalism legacy extends beyond her lifetime. Her pioneering work laid the groundwork for future investigative journalists and activists who sought to uncover and confront systemic injustices. Wells demonstrated that the pen could be a powerful weapon against oppression, inspiring generations to come. Ida B. Wells' investigative journalism was a relentless pursuit of truth and justice in the face of systemic racism. Through her work at the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight newspaper, she fearlessly exposed the motivations behind lynching, earning the ire of white supremacists, particularly the Ku Klux Klan. Despite threats, violence, and the burning of her printing company, Wells remained steadfast in her commitment to unveiling the harsh realities of racial violence. Her legacy endures as a testament to the power of investigative journalism in challenging and dismantling entrenched systems of oppression. In the turbulent and racially charged atmosphere of the late 19th century, Ida B. Wells emerged as a powerful voice against the heinous crime of lynching. The year 1892 marked a turning point in Wells's life and activism as she co-founded the Anti-Lynching Crusade, an organization that would become a beacon of hope in the fight against racial violence. Ida B. Wells' journey to anti-lynching activism was deeply personal and profoundly rooted in the harsh realities of racial discrimination. Born into slavery in 1862, Wells experienced the aftermath of the Civil War and the Reconstruction era, witnessing the emergence of the Ku Klux Klan and the rise of violent tactics to suppress African American progress. Her personal awakening to the horrors of lynching occurred in 1892 when her close friends, Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Henry Stewart, were lynched in Memphis. Devastated by this tragedy, Wells channeled her grief into activism, vowing to expose the truth behind lynching and bring about an end to this barbaric practice. It was in the aftermath of this personal loss that she co-founded the Anti-Lynching Crusade, marking the beginning of a fearless campaign that would change the course of history. As a seasoned journalist and editor, Wells had already established herself as a prominent figure through her work at the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight newspaper. Her commitment to truth and justice found a platform in this publication, where she fearlessly addressed issues of racial inequality, discrimination, and violence. However, it was the lynching of her friends that propelled her into the forefront of the anti-lynching movement. Wells utilized her position at the newspaper to shed light on the prevalence of lynching and to challenge the prevailing narrative that often portrayed African American victims as criminals deserving of their fate. Through incisive and unapologetic journalism, she exposed the underlying motivations behind lynching, which were rooted in white supremacy, economic competition, and a desire to maintain racial dominance. Motivated by a deep sense of justice and an unyielding commitment to the truth, Ida B. Wells, alongside other like-minded activists, officially founded the Anti-Lynching Crusade in 1892. The organization aimed not only to raise awareness about the scourge of lynching, but also to actively combat it through advocacy, education, and legal means. Wells understood the power of information, and she embarked on a tireless mission to gather evidence and testimonies related to lynching incidents. Traveling extensively across the southern United States, she interviewed survivors, families of victims, and eyewitnesses, documenting the gruesome details of these acts of racial violence. This meticulous and courageous approach allowed her to compile a substantial body of evidence that would later be instrumental in her anti-lynching campaign. The Anti-Lynching Crusade became a vehicle for Wells to expose the magnitude of racial violence plaguing the African American community. Her investigative work brought to light not only the individual stories of lynching victims, but also the systemic nature of the issue. Through articles, pamphlets, and public speeches, Wells disseminated the harrowing tales of brutality and sought to awaken the conscience of the nation. One of her most significant works during this period was the pamphlet titled Southern Horrors: Lynch Law in All Its Phases, where she systematically dismantled the justifications given for lynching and presented a damning critique of the racial prejudices that fueled these atrocities. This publication, along with others, served as a powerful tool in rallying public sentiment against lynching and mobilizing support for the anti-lynching crusade. Ida B. Wells' dedication to justice was unwavering. Despite facing threats, intimidation, and backlash from white supremacists, she pressed on with her mission. Wells knew that the path she had chosen was fraught with danger, but her commitment to ending the scourge of lynching propelled her forward. In her pursuit of justice, Wells collaborated with other civil rights activists, forming alliances that strengthened the anti-lynching crusade. Together, they lobbied politicians, engaged in public speaking tours, and organized protests to bring attention to the urgent need for anti-lynching legislation. The campaign gained momentum, drawing support from both the African American community and sympathetic white allies who recognized the urgency of the cause. The formation and activities of the anti-lynching crusade did not go unnoticed by the Ku Klux Klan. Wells' unapologetic exposure of racial violence, along with her calls for justice, infuriated the white supremacist establishment. The Klan saw her as a formidable adversary who threatened their grip on power and sought to maintain the status quo of racial oppression. As Wells continued to gather evidence and garner public support, the Klan's animosity towards her intensified. Threats against her life became more explicit, and attempts to silence her grew increasingly violent. The burning down of her printing company was not only an attack on her property, but also a sinister attempt to suppress her voice and cripple the anti-lynching crusade. Ida B. Wells' fearless leadership in the anti-lynching crusade left an indelible mark on the history of the civil rights movement. Her courageous efforts, despite the personal risks and systemic opposition, paved the way for future activists who would continue the fight against racial injustice. The anti-lynching crusade, through Wells' tenacity and strategic advocacy, contributed to a shift in public opinion and eventually led to increased awareness of the horrors of lynching. While the fight against racial violence was far from over, Wells' groundwork laid the foundation for subsequent generations to challenge systemic racism and discrimination. The formation of the anti-lynching crusade in 1892 marked a crucial chapter in Ida B. Wells' remarkable journey as an activist and journalist. Through her relentless pursuit of justice, she exposed the brutal realities of lynching, documented the widespread violence against African Americans, and became a symbol of resistance against racial oppression. The legacy of Wells and the anti-lynching crusade endures as a testament to the power of truth, courage, and unwavering commitment to justice in the face of adversity. The burning of Ida B. Wells's printing company stands as a dark chapter in the relentless campaign of terror waged by the Ku Klux Klan against her fearless pursuit of justice. This violent act, orchestrated with the intent to silence her unyielding voice, serves as a poignant symbol of the lengths to which white supremacists were willing to go to suppress the truth. In 1892, the printing press of the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight newspaper became the epicenter of a targeted attack by the Ku Klux Klan. The newspaper, a bastion of truth in a landscape of racial injustice, was more than just a source of information. It was a symbol of resistance against the oppressive forces that sought to maintain the status quo. By targeting the printing company, the Klan aimed to strike at the heart of Wells' ability to expose their atrocities. The decision to burn down the printing company was a desperate and calculated move by the Klan. Ida B. Wells's investigative journalism had been a relentless force. peeling away the layers of deception that had allowed lynching and racial violence to persist unchecked. The Klan, feeling the ground shifting beneath them, sought to silence Wells and extinguish the flame of truth that her printing press represented. The flames that consumed the printing company did not only destroy physical infrastructure, they aimed to instill fear and enforce a chilling effect on those who dared to challenge the white supremacist narrative. The aftermath of the arson was not just a smoldering ruin, it was a stark warning to other journalists, activists, and African Americans who dared to question the prevailing order. The Klan believed that by destroying the means of disseminating information, they could erase the inconvenient truths Wells had unearthed. Despite the devastating loss, Ida B. Wells refused to be silenced. The burning of her printing company only fueled her determination to expose the injustices perpetrated by the Klan and other white supremacist groups. Rather than succumbing to intimidation, Wells harnessed the incident as a rallying cry, vowing to rebuild and continue her crusade against racial violence. Her resilience in the face of adversity sent a powerful message. The truth could not be extinguished. The burning of the printing company reverberated beyond the personal and professional sphere of Ida B. Wells. It struck at the heart of the African American community in Memphis, who saw in the free speech and headlight a beacon of hope and a platform for their voices. The attack underscored the vulnerability of Black-owned businesses and institutions in the face of racial hatred. However, it also galvanized the community, fostering a sense of solidarity and determination to resist the forces of oppression. The violent attack on the printing company escalated the peril faced by Ida B. Wells. The Klan's willingness to resort to arson to suppress her activism signaled a dangerous escalation in tactics. The threat to her life and well-being intensified, with the burning serving as a prelude to subsequent attempts on her life. Yet, in the face of this escalating danger, Wells stood resolute, determined to confront the Klan and their agenda head-on. The rebuilding of the printing company became a symbolic act of defiance against the Klan's attempt to snuff out the truth. It demonstrated that the spirit of resistance could not be extinguished by mere flames. Wells, with the support of her community, resurrected the free speech and headlight, ensuring that the voices silenced by racial violence would continue to be heard. The burning of Ida B. Wells's printing company is an indelible part of her legacy. It serves as a testament to her unwavering commitment to justice and the unyielding power of the truth. Despite the Klan's attempt to stifle her, Wells emerged stronger, more determined, and with a renewed sense of purpose. Her resilience in the face of such adversity became a rallying point for future generations of activists, reinforcing the idea that, even in the darkest moments, the pursuit of justice and truth must endure. The burning of Ida B. Wells' printing company was a violent retaliation by the Ku Klux Klan against her fearless pursuit of justice. It sought to suppress the truth, silence a powerful voice, and intimidate the African American community. However, this act of terror did not break Wells's spirit. Instead, it fueled her determination to expose the injustices of racial violence, leaving an enduring legacy of resilience and defiance in the face of systemic oppression. Ida B. Wells, a courageous African-American journalist and anti-lynching crusader, faced numerous assassination attempts as a result of her fearless fight against racism and the Ku Klux Klan. The threats and intimidation she endured became an integral part of her existence, reflecting the grave dangers she faced for daring to challenge the entrenched white supremacist establishment. Wells' bold stance against racial injustice and lynching drew the ire of the Ku Klux Klan, a notorious white supremacist organization known for its violent tactics and efforts to maintain racial hierarchy. As her activism gained prominence, the Klan saw her as a formidable threat to their agenda, leading to a series of targeted attacks on her life. The attempts on Wells' life were not limited to mere threats. They took various forms, each designed to silence her and undermine her advocacy for justice and equality. These assassination attempts underscored the depth of the Klan's opposition to her work and the extent to which they were willing to go to maintain their grip on power. One of the earliest instances of violence against Wells occurred in 1892, when her newspaper, the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight, published a scathing editorial denouncing the lynching of 3 African-American men. In response to this bold exposé, a white mob ransacked and destroyed the newspaper's office. This incident marked the beginning of the Klan's concerted efforts to suppress Wells's voice. The destruction of her printing press and the burning down of her newspaper office were not isolated acts of vandalism, but strategic attempts to cripple her ability to disseminate information and rally public support against racial violence. Despite these setbacks, Wells remained undeterred, finding alternative platforms to continue her crusade against lynching. As her influence grew, so did the severity of the threats against her life. Wells received numerous death threats, both in writing and through anonymous messages, warning her to cease her anti-lynching campaign or face dire consequences. These threats were often laced with racial slurs and vile language, reflecting the Klan's deep-seated hatred and desperation to silence her. In addition to the psychological toll of constant threats, Wells faced more direct and immediate dangers. She became a target for physical violence, with incidents ranging from harassment on the streets to planned assaults. The Klan orchestrated several ambushes in an attempt to eliminate her as a vocal opponent of their agenda. Despite the ever-present danger, Wells continued to travel extensively, documenting cases of lynching, speaking at public events, and advocating for justice. Her resilience in the face of relentless intimidation showcased her unwavering commitment to the cause and her refusal to bow to the forces of racism and oppression. One particularly harrowing incident occurred in 1892 when Wells was returning to Memphis from a trip to New York. As she reached the city, she discovered that a white mob had gathered with the intent to attack her. Recognizing the imminent danger, Wells changed her travel plans, avoiding the potentially deadly confrontation. This incident highlighted the constant peril she faced and the need for her to remain vigilant at all times. The Klan's attempts to silence Wells extended beyond physical violence. They sought to tarnish her reputation and credibility through character assassination. False rumors and malicious gossip were spread about her personal life, aiming to discredit her as a means of undermining the impact of her activism. Despite these efforts, Wells persevered, maintaining her focus on the larger mission of dismantling the racist structures that enabled lynching and violence against African Americans. Wells' resilience and determination in the face of assassination attempts contributed significantly to the exposure of racial violence and the fight against the Ku Klux Klan. Her ability to withstand physical and psychological threats made her a symbol of resistance, inspiring others to join the struggle for civil rights. The dangers she confronted only served to strengthen her resolve, solidifying her legacy as a pioneer in the ongoing battle against systemic racism and injustice. Ida B. Wells' political activism and advocacy for women's suffrage were integral components of her lifelong commitment to dismantling systemic injustices. At a time when the suffrage movement often marginalized African American women, Wells emerged as a powerful and vocal advocate, challenging not only racism but also within the broader struggle for equality. Wells' involvement in the suffrage movement can be traced back to her early years as a journalist and activist. In 1892, she attended the National American Woman Suffrage Association, NASA, convention in Washington, D.C., marking the beginning of her formal engagement with the suffrage cause. However, her enthusiasm was met with disappointment as she quickly realized the prevalent racial prejudices within the movement. Wells recognized the intersectionality of race and gender, understanding that the struggles of African American women were uniquely complex. While the suffrage movement primarily focused on securing voting rights for white women, Wells argued that the fight for women's rights should not exclude or marginalize women of color. She urged suffragists to acknowledge and address the specific challenges faced by African American women in their pursuit of equality. In 1913, Ida B. Wells took a significant step by founding the Alpha Suffrage Club in Chicago, which was the first suffrage organization for African American women. This marked a pivotal moment in the suffrage movement, as Wells sought to create a space where Black women could actively participate and advocate for their rights within the broader context of women's suffrage. Wells consistently challenged the racial biases within suffrage organizations, calling for inclusivity and equal representation. She confronted prominent suffragists, such as Susan B. Anthony and Frances Willard, who were reluctant to address the concerns of Black women. Despite facing resistance and often being excluded from mainstream suffrage events, Wells continued to demand equal recognition and opportunities for African American women. Wells's activism was inherently intersectional, as she navigated the complexities of fighting against racism and simultaneously. Her speeches and writings emphasized the interconnected nature of these struggles, urging activists to recognize the common ground between the fight for racial and gender equality. By doing so, Wells challenged not only the white establishment, but also those within the African American community who failed to acknowledge the specific challenges faced by Black women. In 1913, Wells actively participated in the women's suffrage procession in Washington, D.C., organized by Alice Paul and the Congressional Union. Despite efforts to segregate the march, Wells defiantly joined the Illinois delegation, highlighting her commitment to breaking down racial barriers within the suffrage movement. Her presence symbolized the need for unity in the face of both racial and gender discrimination. Wells' advocacy for suffrage did not come without challenges. She faced resistance from white suffragists who were unwilling to confront the racial prejudices within their ranks. Moreover, some African American male leaders were skeptical of the suffrage movement, leading to internal divisions within the broader fight for civil rights. Ida B. Wells's contributions to the suffrage movement laid the groundwork for future generations of African American women activists. Her emphasis on intersectionality and the inclusion of Black women's voices resonated with later civil rights leaders, including figures like Rosa Parks and Audre Lorde. Wells' legacy endures as a reminder of the ongoing struggle for equality and the importance of recognizing and addressing the intersecting forms of oppression faced by marginalized communities. Her political activism and advocacy for women's suffrage were transformative elements of her tireless efforts to combat racism and by challenging the exclusionary practices within the suffrage movement and founding the Alpha Suffrage Club, Wells became a trailblazer for the intersectional struggle for civil rights. Her legacy continues to inspire contemporary activists working towards a more inclusive and equitable society. Ida B. Wells's legacy is a testament to the power of courage, resilience, and unwavering commitment to justice. Her impact on the fight against racism and the Ku Klux Klan reverberates through history, shaping the course of the civil rights movement and inspiring generations of activists. From her groundbreaking journalism to her fearless activism, Wells left an indelible mark on American society. Wells' groundbreaking investigative journalism exposed the brutal realities of lynching in the United States, challenging the prevailing narrative that often portrayed African Americans as threats deserving of such violence. Her work in the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight newspaper laid the foundation for a new era of investigative reporting that prioritized truth over racial biases. The fearless manner in which she exposed lynching incidents garnered widespread attention, not only shedding light on the atrocities, but also mobilizing public sentiment against racial violence. Ida B. Wells's establishment of the anti-lynching crusade marked a crucial turning point in the fight for racial justice. By co-founding this organization, she created a platform dedicated to raising awareness about lynching and advocating for legislative measures to combat this heinous crime. Wells' activism went beyond words. She traveled extensively, gathering evidence and testimonies, making a compelling case against the perpetrators of racial violence. Wells' unwavering opposition to the Ku Klux Klan was a defining aspect of her legacy. Her investigative reports and vocal stance against racial violence made her a target for the Klan's animosity. The burning down of her printing company by the Klan was a clear attempt to silence her, yet it only fueled her determination. Her courage in the face of such adversity became a symbol of resistance against white supremacy. Beyond her fight against racism, Wells recognized the intersectionality of oppression and advocated for the rights of African American women. Her involvement in the suffrage movement highlighted the need for a unified front against both racism, and Wells' intersectional approach to activism set a precedent for future generations, emphasizing the interconnected struggles faced by marginalized communities. Ida B. Wells's influence extended well beyond her lifetime, significantly impacting the trajectory of the civil rights movement. Her pioneering work laid the groundwork for later activists, such as W.E.B. Du Bois, and later civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. Wells's commitment to justice inspired a new generation of individuals determined to dismantle systemic racism and fight for equal rights. Wells' impact also manifested in educational initiatives aimed at preserving her legacy and teachings. Scholarly works and academic courses dedicated to her life and contributions emerged, ensuring that future generations would be educated about her groundbreaking efforts. The Ida B. Wells Barnett Museum and Cultural Center, established in her honor, stands as a testament to the ongoing commitment to preserving her legacy. Ida B. Wells's legacy continues to be a source of inspiration for contemporary activists engaged in the ongoing struggle for racial justice. Her fearless pursuit of truth and justice serves as a guiding light for those challenging systemic oppression and discrimination. The Black Lives Matter movement, for instance, draws inspiration from the resilience and activism of trailblazers like Wells as they demand an end to racial injustice. Posthumously, Ida B. Wells has received numerous recognitions and awards for her contributions to civil rights and journalism. In 2020, she was awarded a Pulitzer Prize Special Citation for her outstanding and courageous reporting on the horrific and vicious violence against African Americans during the era of lynching. Ida B. Wells' legacy is a tapestry of courage, resilience, and pioneering activism. Her fearless journalism, unyielding opposition to the Ku Klux Klan, and commitment to intersectional justice have left an indelible mark on the fight against racism. The impact of her work echoes through time, inspiring subsequent generations to continue the struggle for justice, equality, and the dismantling of systemic oppression. As society grapples with ongoing challenges related to racial injustice, Ida B. Wells' legacy stands as a beacon of hope, reminding us of the transformative power of one individual's dedication to justice and equality.